The envelope was already open when I walked into that dining room. I noticed it the moment I stepped through the door. Cream-colored, thick stock, the kind of paper that costs more per sheet than most people spend on lunch. It sat at the head of the table, propped against my grandmother's empty chair, like a small flag planted in conquered ground. My cousin Renata had her hand near it, not touching, but near. The way you keep your hand near something you already consider yours? Nobody looked up when I came in. That was the first thing. I had driven 4 hours through November rain, my windshield wipers dragging across glass with that particular exhausted squeak that meant they needed replacing. And nobody in that room, not Renata, not my Uncle Dale, not his wife Cheryl in her pressed silk blouse, looked up when I walked through the door of the house where I had spent every summer of my childhood. I set my bag down by the coat rack. I unwound my scarf, and I watched Renata's fingers drift another inch toward that envelope. The notary was coming at 6 o'clock. That was all any of us had been told. Why had Grandma Cora kept that envelope sealed for 11 years? And why, when she finally passed on a Tuesday morning in October with her bedroom window cracked open to let in the cold air she always said helped her breathe, had she left instructions that it be opened only in the presence of a licensed notary, with every grandchild present in the room? I pulled out the chair farthest from the head of the table and sat down to wait. The dining room smelled of furniture polish and something underneath it, something older. Beeswax from the candles Grandma Cora lit every Sunday, dried roses from the arrangement she kept on the sideboard, changed faithfully each spring. And beneath all of that, faint as a memory, the vanilla extract she used in her pound cake, soaked so deeply into the wallpaper over decades that no amount of repainting could fully drive it out. I had grown up poor in this family, not poor by accident, poor by circumstance, and by the way circumstances get decided for you before you're old enough to understand the deciding. My mother, Grandma Cora's youngest daughter, had left the family home at 19 with a man my grandmother never entirely approved of, and she had spent the years that followed building a small, careful life in a city 4 hours away. When that man left, I was 6. My mother rebuilt again, smaller this time, more careful. We had enough. But enough, in the language of the Beaumont family, was a word that meant barely. That meant charity. That meant we should all be grateful Cora remembered us at Christmas. Renata's mother, my Aunt Patricia, had stayed close. She had managed the accounts, organized the family gatherings, handled Grandma Cora's doctor's appointments in the later years. And Renata, who had grown up in the house next door and spent her life positioning herself in Grandma Cora's sightline, had inherited that talent for proximity. She knew which chair Cora preferred. She knew which television program Cora watched on Friday evenings. She knew when to bring chamomile and when to bring silence. What Renata did not know was that silence runs in 2 directions. Cheryl leaned over to Dale and said something behind the back of her hand, and both of them glanced at me with the particular expression, brief, practiced, almost kind, that people use when they want you to feel included, but also want you to know your inclusion is conditional. Dale cleared his throat. Long drive, Marin? 4 hours. I kept my voice even. Rain most of the way. He picked up his phone and looked at it. The conversation was over. Marin. That was my name. Marin Beaumont, born on a February morning 29 years ago in a hospital 2 states away, while my grandmother sat in this very room and reportedly said nothing when the phone call came. My mother had told me that story once, and once only, and I had carried it the way you carry a small stone in your coat pocket, always knowing it's there, mostly forgetting, and then some days your fingers find it, and the weight is startling all over again. A car door closed outside. one firm sound in the wet evening air. Renata straightened. Dale put his phone away. Cheryl smoothed her blouse, and I watched all three of them compose themselves with the specific alertness of people who have already rehearsed the outcome they expect and are simply waiting for the world to confirm it. The man who came through the door was shorter than I'd imagined. Narrow shoulders, a dark coat beaded with rainwater, a leather briefcase that he set carefully on the floor before removing his coat. He introduced himself as Mr. Augustin Farrell, notary and legal representative of the estate of Cora May Beaumont, and he did so without ceremony, the way people who carry real authority often speak, quietly, with the assumption that the room will adjust to them, rather than the other way around. He sat at the head of the table. He placed the cream-colored envelope in front of him and set his briefcase on the chair to his left. "Before we begin," he said, "I need to confirm that all named parties are present." He looked at a paper in his hand. "Renata Beaumont Collins?" Renata raised her chin. "Present." "Dale Beaumont?" "Right here." He looked up from his paper then. His eyes moved to me with a steadiness that I noticed, that I tucked away to examine later. "And Cora Beaumont?" Something moved in my chest when he said the middle name. Cora. I had always known I carried her name in the middle, but hearing it spoken in this room, in this moment, by this man, was different from knowing it. "Present," I said. He nodded once and opened the briefcase. What he removed was not the envelope on the table. The envelope on the table, the cream-colored one Renata had been hovering over for an hour, Mr. Farrell set carefully to one side. From the briefcase, he removed a different document, thicker, bound with a dark blue cover, fastened with a silver clip. He placed it on the table in front of him with the care of someone setting down a glass that is very full. Renata's eyes moved from the blue-covered document to the cream envelope and back again. "Mrs. Cora May Beaumont," Mr. Farrell began, and his voice settled into the particular cadence of a man reading something that has been precisely, deliberately written, prepared 2 documents in the years preceding her passing. The first is a letter of personal wishes addressed to her family collectively. He tapped the cream envelope. The second is her will, last amended 14 months ago in this office, notarized and witnessed according to the laws of this state. He tapped the blue document. 14 months ago, I did the arithmetic without meaning to. 14 months ago, I had driven up here alone, in that same car with the dragging windshield wipers, because my grandmother had called me on a Thursday evening and asked me to come for the weekend. She had not explained why. She had made pound cake. We had sat in her kitchen on Saturday morning while the November light came through the curtains, and she had held both of my hands across the table and looked at me for a long time without speaking. I had thought she was saying goodbye. Maybe she was. But she was doing something else at the same time, and I had not understood it until right now, watching Mr. Farrell unclip the blue document and find his page. Renata was very still. That stillness was new. In all the years I had known her, she had moved through family gatherings like weather, present, constant, impossible to ignore. This stillness was something I had never seen on her before, and I filed it away the way I file things that don't yet make sense. "I'll read the essential provisions," Mr. Farrell said. "The full document is available for review after this meeting." Mrs. Beaumont was precise in her language, and I'll honor that precision. He read Grandma Cora's full name and the date, a Tuesday in August 14 months ago. And then the preamble, the standard language about being of sound mind and deliberate intent, and I noticed Dale relax a little as that language settled into the room, as though soundness of mind confirmed what he had already decided would happen. And then Mr. Farrell turned the page. "The property known as the Beaumont family home located at 1140 Sycamore Creek Road, and comprising the main residence, the adjacent cottage, and the 11 acres of surrounding land, along with all financial holdings in accounts bearing the name Cora May Beaumont, including the primary savings account at Meridian Trust, the investment account managed through Callaway Asset Group, and the contents of the safety deposit box held at the downtown branch of First Community Bank. He paused. Not for effect. He paused because that is where the breath goes naturally when you are reading something long and specific, when you are arriving at the part that matters. Are bequeathed in their entirety to my granddaughter, Marin Cora Beaumont. The room did not explode. That is the thing about real moments. They rarely do what movies suggest. The room went quiet the way a room goes quiet when something irrevocable has just entered it, when the air itself seems to understand that what was said cannot be unsaid. Renata made a sound that was not quite a word. Dale's hand flattened on the table. Cheryl's face did something complicated and then settled into a blankness that took visible effort to maintain. My hands were in my lap. I did not move them. Mr. Farrell continued reading. There were provisions for a modest bequest to a neighbor who had shoveled Grandma Cora's walk in her last winters. There was a gift to the church's youth music fund. There were specific instructions about the piano in the parlor, which had belonged to Grandma Cora's own mother, and which was to remain in the house that was now mine. When he finished, he set the document down and looked at the room the way you look at a situation you have watched unfold before and have learned not to interfere with. Renata found her voice first. That can't be right. Mr. Farrell did not argue with her. He slid the document 3 inches toward the center of the table. Marin wasn't even here. Renata's voice had taken on a quality I recognized, something tight and high underneath the surface, something that happens when a story you've been telling yourself stops matching the story the world is telling you. She barely visited. We were the ones who were here. We took care of everything. Dale put his hand on Renata's arm, and she shook it off. I breathed in. I breathed out. I looked at the blue document on the table, at the careful black type, at the silver clip that Mr. Farrell had set to one side, and I thought about a Saturday morning in November, 14 months ago, about pound cake on blue plates, about my grandmother's hands covering mine, about what she had said while the curtains moved in the kitchen light. She had said, "Baby, I want you to know that I see you. I have always seen you. Your mother raised you with dignity in hard circumstances, and I did not always honor that the way I should have, and I am sorry for it. I am putting that right." I had thought she meant those words as words, an apology, a moment of grace between an old woman and her granddaughter. I had driven home that Sunday and wept in the parking lot of a gas station 2 miles from the highway. Not from grief, but from the particular release that comes when someone finally says the thing you have needed them to say. But Grandma Cora was not a woman who left things at words. She never had been. She had built a life with her hands and her decisions, had purchased that house in 1971 when a Black woman purchasing property in that county was an act that required more than money, that required a particular brand of quiet, immovable determination. She had raised 4 children, buried a husband, managed her own finances for 32 years without asking anyone to co-sign. She had known exactly what she was doing 14 months ago. She had been doing 2 things at once, saying goodbye and making sure. Renata was crying now, but it was the crying of someone whose argument hasn't worked yet, who is escalating to find what will. She was confused. She must have been confused. The amendment, Farrell, how long ago did you say? 14 months ago, she could barely. Mrs. Beaumont was evaluated for cognitive capacity as part of the amendment process. Mr. Farrell's voice stayed level. The documentation of that evaluation is part of the estate record. She was precise, she was clear, and she was entirely certain. The word certain landed in the room and stayed there. I looked at the cream-colored envelope, still sitting to Mr. Farrell's right. The letter of personal wishes, addressed to the family collectively. "May I?" I asked. Mr. Farrell passed it to me. The envelope had been opened, the seal already broken. Prepared for the reading, I understood. Inside was a single sheet of the same thick cream paper, folded in thirds. My grandmother's handwriting, which had always been careful and large, the handwriting of a woman who had learned penmanship in an era when penmanship meant something, filled the page front and back. I read it to myself first. Then, because I thought the room needed to hear it, I read it aloud. "To my family, whom I love with the full, complicated weight of a long life. I have not always done right by everyone gathered here, and I know it. There are old silences I kept too long, and old hurts I did not address when addressing them might have cost me peace in my own house. I am addressing them now, because it is the only time I have left. Marin did not come here often. That is true. She did not come because she was not made to feel that she belonged here, and the responsibility for that belongs to this family, not to her. She carries my name in the middle of hers because I asked her mother to give it to her when she was born as a private promise. I am keeping that promise now. The house is hers because the house needs someone who understands what it costs to build. I trust her with that. I trust her to know its value goes deeper than the property line, deeper than the appraisal. It is the record of what we built. I want it held by someone who will remember that. I love you all. I am not punishing anyone. I am finishing something I started." I folded the letter back along its creases. Dale had not spoken in several minutes. Cheryl was looking at her hands. Renata had stopped crying and arrived somewhere past it, in that quiet place where feelings get reorganized into plans. I could see it happening, the way you can sometimes see weather shifting over flat land. She would call an attorney. She would contest the evaluation. She would argue undue influence, and she might try all of those things. She might. But my grandmother had been a meticulous woman who understood that meticulous matters, and Mr. Augustin Farrell looked like a man who had prepared for precisely this kind of afternoon. I set the letter down next to the blue document. I looked at the room, the sideboard with the dried roses, the wallpaper with its faint ghost of vanilla, the empty chair at the head of the table where Grandma Cora had sat for every holiday I could remember, presiding over meals that were sometimes warm and sometimes complicated, and always laden with the weight of a family that had been through things it hadn't fully finished processing. I had spent my whole life in this family, feeling like a guest in a room I was technically invited to, but never quite meant for. I had learned to be quiet about my needs and careful with my presence and precise with my words, because those were the tools available to me, and because my mother had modeled exactly that. Dignity maintained under pressure. Grace extended to people who had not always extended it back. I understood now where she had learned it, and I understood something else. Grandma Cora had not left me this house because she felt guilty. She had left it to me because she had watched me, across 29 years and the particular distance that comes from being the far branch of a family, and she had made a judgment about character, about steadiness, about who holds things carefully, the investment account at Callaway Asset Group. I had not let myself think about that yet, but I allowed it now, sitting in that dining room with the rain against the windows and the smell of beeswax in the air. My grandmother had lived modestly, in a house she'd bought for $40,000 in 1971 and had never mortgaged again. She had driven the same car for 12 years. She had made her own pound cake. I did not know, sitting there, what was in that account. I would find out the next morning, when Mr. Farrell walked me through the full estate summary in his office. I would sit across from him with a cup of coffee I would forget to drink, and he would place a single sheet of paper in front of me with a number on it that would make the room very quiet and very bright at the same time. Grandma Cora had been investing, quietly and consistently, since 1979. She had told no one, not because she was secretive, because she understood, with the bone-deep knowledge of a woman who had purchased land in 1971 as an act of will, that wealth announced is wealth endangered. She had watched it grow over 4 decades the way you watch something you have planted, steadily, with patience, without making noise about it. She had chosen me to tend the next season. That morning, in Mr. Farrell's office, I would hold that piece of paper for a long time. My coffee would go cold. Outside the window, Sycamore Creek Road would be visible in the November light, bare-limbed trees along the median, the occasional car moving through the silver morning. And I would think about my mother rebuilding her life twice, about the parking lot 2 miles from the highway, about pound cake on blue plates and my grandmother's hands, papery and warm, covering mine, about the word enough and all the things it had meant in this family, and all the things it was going to mean now. But that was the next morning. In the dining room, the evening was still happening. Mr. Farrell was closing the blue document into his briefcase. Renata had found her phone and was looking at it with the focused attention of someone who is about to make a call she has already decided to make. Dale was talking to Cheryl in a low voice, and Cheryl's silk blouse caught the light from the chandelier as she nodded. None of them looked at me. That was the second thing. I stood up from the table. I walked to the sideboard and looked at the dried roses, which were dusty pink and had been there since spring, and I thought about whether I would change them when spring came around again. I thought I probably would. I thought I might cut fresh ones from the garden if the rose bushes survived the winter, which they usually did. Grandma Cora had planted them 20 years ago against the south wall of the house where the brick held heat, and they were stubborn and established and not going anywhere. I thought about learning to do that, to tend them the way she had. There is a particular kind of grief that lives alongside gratitude, that does not cancel it but runs parallel to it. 2 rivers in the same geography. I missed my grandmother with a specific physical ache, the kind that lives in the hands, in the place where her hands had covered mine. I would miss her for the rest of my life. The house, the account, the 11 acres and the piano in the parlor. None of that addressed the missing, and I did not expect it to. But she had given me something that went past property lines and past numbers on a page. She had given me the proof of her own seeing. 11 years she had kept that envelope sealed. 14 months ago, she had sat across from me in her kitchen, and then driven herself to a notary's office and put her careful handwriting to a document that said, "I see this one. I trust this one. This one carries my name." I had always known that dignity was not given to you. My mother had known it. Grandma Cora had known it in 1971, standing at a property office in a county that had made it hard. You build it over years, through the small decisions that compound the way interest compounds, through the choice to be precise when it would be easier to be approximate, to be present when it would be more comfortable to disappear, to drive 4 hours through November rain to sit at a table where nobody looks up when you come in. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the building is witnessed by someone with the authority to name it. Renata left the dining room without speaking to me. I heard her on the phone in the hallway. her voice low and tight and moving in the direction of the kitchen. Dale and Cheryl said their good nights to Mr. Farrell in the formal register people use when they want to seem unaffected. And then they left, their car headlights sweeping across the dining room windows as they turned out of the drive. Mr. Farrell snapped his briefcase shut. He stood and put on his coat, and then he looked at me the way he had looked at me earlier, with that steadiness I had noticed, and filed away. "She asked me to give you this separately," he said. He reached into his coat pocket and held out a small key, old brass, the kind that fits a safety deposit box. "She said you'd know what it's for." I took the key. It was lighter than I expected and warmer than it should have been from sitting against him all evening. I did not know what it was for. Not yet. But I understood that it was another door, another piece of something my grandmother had arranged with her characteristic quiet care, and that I would find my way to it. Mr. Farrell let himself out. The front door closed, and then there was only me in Grandma Cora's dining room, with the rain moving against the windows and the beeswax smell and the faint ghost of vanilla in the walls and the cream-colored envelope on the table with its letter folded back along its creases and the brass key warm in my palm. I stood there for a long time. Then I walked to the sideboard. I picked up the dried roses, dusty pink, last spring's, ready to be replaced. I carried them to the kitchen and laid them on the counter. Opened the cabinet under the sink. Found the small ceramic vase.